are rivers in this world that do not look entirely real when one first comes upon them. The Scarlet Forest is full of such places. Water moves there in long red currents beneath curtains of vine and root, stained not with blood but with tannin and clay drawn from the flooded earth. In calmer hours the channels brighten, turning glassy and blue where the canopy parts and the light reaches down in broken shafts. Then the rains come again, and the whole region changes character at once. Banks vanish, hollow ground fills, side channels awaken. What had been a forest with rivers becomes for a time a river pretending to be a forest. And in those swollen hours, when the rain speaks so loudly upon the leaves that lesser sounds are swallowed whole, one begins to understand why some creatures do not merely inhabit a place, but become part of its ruling mood. Lagiacrus is one of those creatures. To call it merely large is unhelpful. Plenty of beasts are large. Size alone does not explain the peculiar stillness that takes hold when signs of it appear. What defines Lagiacrus is not only its bulk, but its certainty. It carries itself with the easy authority of an animal to whom hesitation has become unfamiliar. Even at rest, it gives the impression of possession. A basking specimen on a river shelf does not look as though it is borrowing the bank for warmth. It looks as though the mud, the roots, the waterline, and the shape of the inlet have all been arranged for its convenience. The old river folk call it the Lord of the Waters, and though such titles tend to grow in the telling, in this case, the exaggeration is mild. There are predators that rule by frenzy, and others by numbers, and others still by terrible endurance. Lagiacrus rules by domain. It belongs so fully to the places where water and land interlock that anything else entering them feels immediately like an intruder. At first glance, its outline invites comparison to crocodilian stock, but only in the way a storm front resembles a wall. The resemblance is true at distance and inadequate up close. The skull is long and forceful, plated in blue shelling that deepens in color when wet and fades toward a duller gray after hours beneath open light. The jaws are crowded with sharp teeth and girded by jutting shell-like ridges that seem almost like a second armament, layered atop the first. Behind the head, the neck extends further than one expects from so heavily armored a swimmer, giving the beast a reach that feels unfair. That neck flows into a trunk at once muscular and streamlined, with heavy dorsal spikes lifting impaired lines along the back. Further down, the tail begins broad and strong, then narrows into a laterally flattened blade, ending in a finned structure fit not for ornament, but for propulsion. The horns over the brow only worsen the effect. They do not look decorative. They look ancestral. They suggest that whatever first taught this lineage to command water did so a very long time ago, and with considerable thoroughness. Yet for all this armor and menace, the most unsettling quality of Lagiacrus is not how hard it looks, but how sensitive it appears to be. One can watch lesser leviathans thrash or slide through flooded channels with obvious effort, their movement all splash and disturbance. Lagiacrus moves as though the water has already informed it of everything important. The surface tightens before it turns. Prey startles before the head lifts. It will hold position in murk, where almost nothing should be visible, and then strike with such confidence that one is forced to conclude it had no need of sight in the first place. There are old theories among marsh naturalists that the skin itself reads the river. Looking along the jawlines and at the seams between scales, I have often suspected they may be right. The armor is not blunt in the way armor usually is. It seems selective. Strength preserved on the outside, and something finer nested beneath. One has the uncanny feeling, when standing near water known to hold Lagiacrus, that any careless touch upon the surface has already been felt elsewhere by something enormous and patient. This becomes even more convincing during downpour, when the Scarlet Forest enters its wettest temper. Rain hammers leaf and root. The channels rise and spread into low country. Vision becomes unreliable, then nearly useless. Smaller creatures suffer first. Their paths vanish. Their old landmarks drown. Their hearing fills with water sound until caution frays into confusion. Lagiacrus, on the other hand, seems to improve. That is when it appears most inevitable. The flooded forest becomes a map written in pressure, current, and vibration. And this is precisely the sort of map it seems born to read. A fleeing herbivore, splashing through knee-deep floodwater, may believe itself hidden by the noise of rain. But all it has really done is speak louder in a language Lagiacrus understands better than any other animal in the forest. It is tempting, when speaking of so large a predator, to dwell on violence and leave it there. But violence alone does not make a sovereign. Plenty of beasts can kill. What makes Lagiacrus singular is the marriage of force with economy. It is not a berserker of the rivers. It does not waste itself in ceaseless motion or noisy rage. Watching it hunt, one is struck less by savagery than by restraint. It spends long stretches almost inert, conserving everything. Then, when the angle closes and certainty arrives, it moves with terrible decisiveness. The body uncoils. The tail writes one hard stroke through the water. The neck aligns. The jaws close. In that brief burst, one sees the logic of the whole animal. All that mass exists not to lumber continuously, but to explode once at the exact right moment and make the matter final. The waters of the Scarlet Forest would already be enough to make such a predator formidable. But Lagiacrus carries an additional cruelty within its body, one stranger than fang or tail, and far more difficult for an observer to forget. It is an electric beast. The old descriptions speak of power housed along the spine, of charge built beneath the hide and released through the body in pulses strong enough to convulse the water around it. This much, at least, is undeniably true to the eye. When the creature rouses fully, the dorsal structures along its back begin to shine with an inner blue-white stress, not as though they are lit, but as though something beneath them is straining to escape. The throat and mouth take on a swollen brightness. The water nearest the body shivers first. Then bubbles begin to gather in quick, nervous chains. Then comes the discharge itself. I have heard men call this boiling, and in the panic of the moment, the word does not feel misplaced. But one must be careful with language. Whole rivers do not simply leap to cookery because one animal is angry, no matter how fearfully that anger is delivered. What happens is subtler and, to my mind, more frightening. The water near the animal seems to lose composure. It trembles, foams, spits, and fills with a metallic scent that rides sharp even through rain. Small fish turn white-bellied in an instant. Eels knot upon themselves. Anything with muscle too near the pulse is seized by its own body, arrested from within. That is the true horror of Lagiacrus. It does not merely strike flesh from the outside. It reaches into the hidden command of muscle and compels it. A creature trying to flee may suddenly find its own body has become an accomplice to its captor. Because of this, the beast's electrical power is best understood not as a constant weapon, but as a finishing one. There is no sign that Lagiacrus wastes such force casually. Even the most dominant predators live under the law of expenditure. A body that can unleash such violence must also pay for it. One often sees, after a major discharge, a brief interval of stillness. The animal lifts its head. The movement slows. The mouth works open once or twice as if tasting the air. In deeper water, it may sink and hover. In shallows, it may haul partially onto land and hold there, letting the flood pass around its plated belly, while whatever inner machinery drives that power settles back into readiness. If the charge were easy, it would use it constantly. It does not. That restraint tells us almost everything. Electricity is not a trick to be scattered around like spray from the tail. It is thunder kept in reserve, spent when the return is worth the price. The shape of Lagiacrus's life is therefore written by thresholds. It thrives where water becomes deep enough to conceal its body, shallow enough to trap the careless, wide enough to carry scent and current, but structured enough that prey must still choose routes. This is why the Scarlet Forest suits it so perfectly. The place is a maze of channels, roots, flooded shelves, and undercut banks. Rain changes those paths by the hour, but not the underlying geometry. Deep pools remain, narrow mouths remain, sun-warmed shelves remain, hidden recesses remain. Every great aquatic predator requires not only food, but places from which food may be made predictable. Lagiacrus seems to favor precisely those pockets where moving water feeds into temporary calm. There the current brings news. There silt settles just enough to hide its body. Their prey must slow or turn. It is not enough for an apex animal to be powerful. It must also be good at finding the places where power is cheapest. There is one basin in the southern flood reaches of the forest where I watched a mature specimen over the course of 6 days. I never saw the full body at once, except when it hauled out to bask. but the pattern became plain by the second day. Before dawn, it would leave the deeper hollow and move into the branching channels while the air was cool. At first light, it hunted fish and smaller reptiles in water no deeper than a hunter's waist. By mid-morning, once the brightness rose and insects began to haze over the banks, it withdrew to a shelf of stone beneath a curtain of roots and remained there nearly motionless, breathing so slowly that one understood how easily a less cautious observer might mistake it for abandoned geology. In the evening, it became active again, and every evening, just before full dark, it turned toward the deep basin at the center of the range and sank out of sight with the familiarity of a creature returning not merely to shelter, but to the seat of its authority. Such basins matter more than we often credit. Every dominant animal has a core to its territory, a place where effort falls away and advantage rises steeply. In wolves, it is the den and surrounding roots. In great cats, it is the cover-rich heart of the range. In Lagiacrus, it is these deep-watered chambers where approach narrows, escape worsens, and all the advantages of current, concealment, and shock belong to it alone. One feels this even as a witness. There are stretches of river where one may think of the creature abstractly, as one thinks of storms somewhere beyond the horizon. But near such a basin, abstraction vanishes. Every branch leaning above the water seems deliberate. Every sound acquires a second meaning. It is less like entering a place where an animal might be, and more like crossing the threshold into an intelligence distributed through mud, water, and root. Its dominance over other creatures is not total, but it is near enough to feel so. The Scarlet Forest is not empty of challenges. Great herbivores move through the flooded lowlands in season, and other large predators lay claim to their own corners of the region. Yet the reports of Lagiacrus fighting rival beasts are credible because such conflicts are almost inevitable wherever rich water meets concentrated life. It does not need to kill every competitor. It needs only to be costly to contest. Many predators are displaced by resistance because resistance slows feeding, risks injury, and turns appetite into arithmetic. Lagiacrus solves that arithmetic brutally. In water, no opponent can disregard the tail. No opponent can disregard the jaws. And no opponent can remain calm while the river itself begins to tighten and spark around its limbs. Even those too large to be easily killed may be made unwilling to continue. It is here that the long neck reveals its strange advantage. Many have assumed it a weakness, and in open water perhaps it would be. A long neck invites drag. It seems the sort of indulgence no serious swimmer should tolerate. Yet Lagiacrus is not built for featureless sea. It is built for channels, submerged timber, roots, shelves, and banks. In such architecture, reach is worth a great deal. The body may remain in deeper cover while the head tests shallower margins. The torso may stay aligned with current, while the neck bends to seize prey, attempting to slip sideways into safety. And in contests with other large animals, That neck allows the jaws to arrive from angles the bulkier body cannot immediately follow. The best hunters are not always those with the greatest straight line efficiency. Often, they are those whose apparent awkwardness conceals a highly specific solution to a highly specific kind of ground. The Scarlet Forest is full of crooked spaces. Lagiacrus carries a crooked weapon. Its feeding tells a similar story. The teeth are not those of a clean flesh slicer alone, nor those of a simple crusher. The mouth seems built first to retain, then to tear, then to drown resistance under momentum. When Lagiacrus takes fish, the action is swift and nearly elegant. When it takes larger prey, elegance disappears. The head braces, the neck knots, the whole front half of the animal becomes a lever. One sees why the jaw ridges are so thickly armored. Prey taken under electric shock does not necessarily become passive. Often it convulses. Often it twists with the blind mechanical panic of a body seized without warning. A weaker mouth might lose purchase. Lagiacrus does not. It anchors and lets the rest of the river do the work. Water is not only the stage of the kill, but one of its chief instruments. A prey animal cannot brace well while buoyed and half-stunned. It is pulled off its own decisions and into the logic of the larger body attached to it. All of this implies a metabolism at once demanding and carefully managed. An animal of such size, such armor, and such electrical capacity cannot be careless about intake. The Scarlet Forest must feed it heavily or lose it. This likely explains why the creature follows the richest hydrological states so closely. Flood is not only good for concealment. Flood redistributes life. Fish spill into margins. Nesting animals are displaced. Smaller reptiles and amphibians are forced from burrows. Wounded creatures are carried by current. Carcasses snag against roots and shelves. What appears to us as seasonal chaos may be, to Lagiacrus, the season of abundance. The forest's great wet convulsions become a feast of accidents, and the beast is built precisely to tax those accidents efficiently. There is also the question of the sea, for many have long claimed that Lagiacrus belongs not only to rivers and flooded forest, but to broader salt waters as well. I believe this is likely true, though perhaps with a caveat that those who speak too romantically of marine dominion tend to miss. To live between sea and fresh water is no simple matter. Salt can be endured without being loved. Many aquatic reptiles manage the burden only by periodic return to rainwater or river mouths, where the body may be corrected and rebalanced. The Scarlet Forest, with its great storms and fresh surges, would be a natural refuge for any leviathan that spends long stretches in harsher waters. In this sense, the forest is not merely hunting ground, but restoration chamber. Here the great storms fall in sheets heavy enough to change whole channels within hours. Here river water spreads thin and sweet across standing pools. Here a seaborne predator might come not only to feed, but to drink. to flush, to settle its salts, and to remember again the softer chemistry of inland flood. This also helps explain the basking. The old descriptions note that Lagiacrus rests on land, and anyone who has watched one haul out after long activity will understand that this is no theatrical habit. A body so powerful in water must pay dearly when air becomes the medium around it. On land, its weight is honest. The limbs must hold what buoyancy no longer hides. It can still fight there, and viciously, but one senses the compromise at once. The motions are more deliberate. The tail becomes less fluent and more instrumental, dragged or planted as counterweight rather than used as pure stroke. Yet the bank offers rewards that water cannot. Heat, rest, sight over the reeds. A place to recover after discharge. A place where parasites may be dried and irritated skin calmed. A place where color changes, too, seem to matter. Fresh from the water, its shelling gleams a deep living blue. After hours in dry warmth, it dulls, grays, and roughens, as though the river had been carrying a more vivid version of the creature upon its back, and the sun has now stripped that sheen away. One should not imagine, however, that land removes its danger. Lagiacrus may be less perfect there, but less perfect than near divine is still ruinous enough. In the drier shelves along the flooded forest margins, I have seen smaller animals make the mistake of reading a hauled-out leviathan as dormant. That misjudgment rarely lasts long. The head turns with startling quickness. The front half of the body surges. There is enough stored violence in the shoulders and neck alone to break any confidence. If water remains within reach, the animal becomes even bolder, because then every terrestrial approach is secretly still an aquatic encounter. The bank is not separate from the river. It is merely its front porch. As for reproduction, little is certain, and perhaps that uncertainty is fitting. Great dominions often conceal their beginnings. We know the lineage persists. We know juveniles exist, lighter in coloration, and not yet burdened with the full severity of adult mass and patina. We know, too, that the young must occupy somewhat different lives, for no basin could support too many full-grown sovereigns in close company, and no forest could endure the appetites of an entire dynasty concentrated in one range. I suspect the earliest years are spent in peripheral waters, where limbs still matter more for maneuver, where electrical output is present but not yet kingly, and where survival depends more on caution than command. As age advances, the tail takes over more of the burden of motion, the body learns patience, the shocks deepen, and a young drifter becomes a territorial certainty. But that is inference, and I would rather admit inference than dress ignorance in false confidence. What can be said with confidence is that Lagiacrus changes the behavior of everything around it. Prey species alter their routes during flood. Other predators feed more quickly when its signs are fresh. Even scavengers become tense along the sheltered inlets it favors, for nothing wishes to be too near a half-submerged carcass, in a basin that smells faintly of ozone. The forest itself seems to organize around its presence. There are channels where fish gather in suspicious absence of pursuit, because the usual smaller hunters have fled the range. There are shelves where bones and shed scales collect, not because Lagiacrus decorates, but because repeated life along the same geometry leaves residue. There are stretches of a riverbank where no hoof marks remain beyond the first two prints, because instinct has taught the herd to turn away before thirst becomes commitment. A powerful predator does more than eat. It edits movement. It writes caution into the landscape. And still, for all this authority, there is something almost serene in the creature when one is fortunate enough to watch it from a true distance, with no scent of oneself reaching the water. It is not a mindless engine of cruelty. It is, rather, one of those animals in whom design has become so coherent that it appears dignified. The same tail that lashes death through shallows also traces beautiful, slow arcs when station keeping against current. The same dorsal ridges that flare with electrical threat sit like blue stones in the rain when the animal is resting. The same jaws that can turn a body rigid with panic may also open lazily to test the weather, then close again with no more drama than a gate settling on its hinges. Great predators often suffer in description because fear narrows our vocabulary. We call them monstrous because they impose consequences. But a thing may be terrible and still be deeply, almost painfully, well made. This is what the Scarlet Forest teaches most clearly about Lagiacrus. It is not merely a beast that inhabits red rivers and flooded routes. It is a translation of those places into flesh. The armored blue of its back belongs to the sheen of wet stone beneath stormlight. The pale underside belongs to the flash of bellies beneath water. The electrical pulse belongs to the short, violent certainty of lightning across the canopy. The patience belongs to deep basins where nothing seems to move until everything does. Even its tendency to haul onto land and dry into duller colors seems in keeping with the forest's own shifts between saturation and baking calm. It is as though the place, given enough time and enough appetite, taught one lineage to embody all of its moods at once. If one wishes to understand it fully, one must stop asking the wrong question. The wrong question is whether Lagiacrus is built more for land or water, whether it is properly a river animal or a sea one, whether its electricity is trick, weapon, or myth. All those questions peel pieces away from the whole and then complain that the pieces feel incomplete. The right question is simpler. What sort of world would produce an animal like this and keep rewarding its existence? The answer is a world of thresholds, a world where rain regularly erases yesterday's safe paths, a world where water is alternately hiding place, road, trap, and instrument, a world where prey must move because standing still means drowning or starving, and where a hunter willing to master uncertainty gains everything. Lagiacrus is not an intrusion upon such a world. It is one of its finest conclusions. And so when the rains gather again over the Scarlet Forest, when the rivers redden and spread and the roots begin to disappear beneath new flood, there is a moment, always, when the place seems to inhale. Lesser things scurry for higher hummocks. Wings rise from the reeds. The channel darkens under the weather. Somewhere below that darkening water, a plated body shifts and wakes. Not hurriedly, not hungrily, at least not in any simple way. Rather, with the confidence of an old ruler returning to a room that was never truly anyone else's. The river tightens. The air takes on that metallic edge. And in the red flood beneath the drowning roots, the thunder leviathan resumes its patient reign. So if you are listening now in the quiet, let the Scarlet Forest keep its deeper waters. Let the red channels run on beneath the roots. Let the flooded shelves belong to something older and heavier than anything willing to name itself master. Let the blue-backed shape beneath the surface remain only half seen, where it is best understood. And if the storm returns tonight, let it return far away from you. Let the river speak in its own language. Let the basin keep its stillness. Let the old Lord of the Waters pass through the flooded forest without needing to rise. Good night, hunter.